All right, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to all of you out there. I hope you're enjoying the music. As per usual, am experiencing some technical difficulties. I still have not figured out how to get the bots to put up links when others do not, and I'll get that fixed eventually. So, what I want to do today then is to step back just a little bit. I've gone ahead and I've cut all of the pattern pieces. That was done a little bit earlier. And what I'm going to do, as the camera finally focuses in, thank you, is I'm going to take and edit some of this video. I'm going to upload that to YouTube, and you will see all of that down below. Once that's done, I'm going to set up a Discord server, set up that YouTube channel, and you'll be able to get all of this later as well. Edited down so that you can take and run with this and very quickly go and make your own stuff later on, right? And what I want to do now, yesterday, or the day before, I should say, what we did is we took an existing pair of pajama bottoms and we copied them, right? We flipped them inside out without taking them apart, and we made our own pattern. Then today, I took that pattern and I modified it just a little bit based on my own measurements. But maybe you don't have your own measurements. Or not your own measurements, maybe you don't have your own PJ bottoms. Maybe you want to make a pattern from scratch. So how would you go about doing that? That's where we're going to start. Once I've done that, I will go ahead and take the pattern pieces that we've cut and we're going to put them together, and then you will have your own article of clothing that you can wear. So that's our goal, right? So it's kind of a two-part episode. We're going to go over how do I generate my own pattern, and then how do we put that together once we've cut out the pieces. And the cutting of the pieces has already been done, so I'm not going to go over that again. If you do want to catch that, and you want help with how do I cut out these pieces, how do I fit them to the fabric that I've purchased or that I found at the thrift store, you can catch that on the previous video, which you can find below. Once I'm done with this, you won't be able to catch it live, of course, but that'll be available to you. So I'm going to step us over into Paint, and we'll go over some of the specifics for that. So let me bring that up in our little display capture here, and I'll turn off the camera real quick. So what I have here in this window is a couple of measurements that I took from our pattern and from me. So what's important from this is my own measurements, because this is how I'm building the pattern, and you would want to take these measurements on yourself if you need them. So for me, my waist is about 32 inches, my hips are about 40 inches, and my outseam, or from the hips down to the floor, is about 40 inches. Well, I shouldn't say down to the floor. Down to about where I want the hemline to be is about 40 inches. And that equates roughly to about a 32-inch inseam. There's around 8 inches difference between the inseam and the outseam, but that's going to be different for everyone, right? Because all bodies are a little different. So you can take that measurement. Now in the pattern that we made, the bottom of the leg that we cut off of the pattern was 15 inches. So I want to consider that. And the other measurement that is going to matter in this is the measurement from the top of the inseam, which is 16 inches. This is the measurement down to the inseam where basically the bottom of the crotch is at. So basically where the leg wraps around to underneath to where all 4 pieces of fabric for the legs comes together. That occurs 16 inches down from the top edge of the fabric. And then the waist width of the leg measured from the top is 11 inches. That's also the width of the bottom of the leg. So that's going to help us with this. And then the width at the inseam, where the inseam meets the corner of the crotch, is 16 inches. So these measurements then are going to give me the requirements I need for the pattern. Now, these measurements you can get yourself by pulling out a pair of jeans and looking at those. And I will mark all of these measurements in on our pattern so that you can see where I got them from. And you can use a pair of jeans that you like, or another pair of PJs, or a pair of shorts, and you can modify these for yourself to get the measurements that are perfect for you, so that this pair of PJs is comfortable and it fits you, and it's not too big, not too small. It's Goldilocks, right? So let's take a look now at how these work. So the measurements for the hips that matter, because we're doing essentially 4 legs, right? We're doing 2 front legs and 2 back legs. They're all going to be sewn together. So the hips get divided by 4. And then I want to leave a little extra so that it can slip over my hips and fit properly. That's where this waist width of the leg comes in, of 11 inches. That gives me more than enough room to work with. And I'm going to add on a seam allowance on there. We did 5/8 inch on the actual pattern itself, but for this, for the purposes of this, we can just consider that to be 1/2 inch because this is already adding an inch onto it. So let's just say 12 inches. And so the first thing I'm going to do is consider 12 inches for this setup, for the waist width. And then the outseam is 40 inches. So we're going to start with a rectangle that is 12 inches by 40 inches. So that's where we're starting. So this is not to scale, but this is the start of our setup. And so this rectangle then is going to be 12 inches by 40 inches. Let me put a text box in. So we're 12 inches here. And we're 40 inches along the bottom. Right? So end to end 40 inches and the width 12 inches. So this is the basic rectangle that creates the leg. Now the things we need to consider are the bottom of leg was 15 inches. So I'm going to give myself a little mark. And remember, this is not to scale, but about 15 inches up, say here, this is where the curve in starts to happen. And the other section of note is the top of inseam down of 16 inches. So from the top of the inseam down about 16 inches, I want to make a mark on that. So about there. And then I want to put in text for those. So in here, this is 15 inches from bottom. And this mark is 16 inches from top. Right? And these are going to give us where those curves matter. So now, from this line, we're going to come in from the width to the inseam 16 inches. So if this is 12 inches here, then we need to come in from here 4 inches, right? So we're going to make ourselves a mark, and we're going to come in 4 inches, or out 4 inches as the case were. Again, not to scale. So this distance is 4 inches. I'm gonna make a mark above that to let us know. So that's 4 inches out. Right? And now we can start building out these curves. So I want to mark this. There's a couple of key factors on this that we want to take into consideration. But this is the basics of it. So this is both legs at this point, right? And I can start adding in those curves now. So I'm going to do a 4-point curve. And I'm going to start from here and curve it in probably to about halfway from here to the bottom. So if I do a quick calculation, 15 plus 16 is 31. So 9 inches in half is about 4.5 inches. But it doesn't have to be 4.5 inches. It's just whatever works best for you. And we're gonna build this curve. And on paper, you can hopefully do this a little bit better. But we kind of build that curve, right? So there's a curve there, and there's going to be a curve up here. So there's that first curve, and then our second curve. To there, and finishing at the top. And it sweeps a lot more at the peak here, right? So I'm gonna try and make that curve work for that. Something like that. Now the things to keep in mind are the things that we've talked about before, right? We want to keep right angles. So this needs to be a right angle, right? So I want to make a marking that lets me remember that that's a right angle. So we'll put that in just a moment. So something like that gives us the curve for the inseam on the place where the inseam meets the front and the back, right? And then we need the markings for our pockets. And for us, the marking on the pocket occurs at 5.5 inches down. So let's do another mark. 5.5 inches down. Right. And 11 3/4 inches down. Oops, I need to actually get the line. So those are our pocket marks. Let me get the text again. So this is 11 3/4 inches and 5.5 inches for the pocket. Maybe if I just space it a bit, that'll work. There we go. So those are our pocket markings. Now, this is, again, the front and the back leg. However, the front and the back legs were just a little different, right? So let me do a copy of this. Here. Oh, come on. And here. So how did they vary from each other? Well, the bottom, or the front leg, had a little bit of a drop here, whereas the top had a little bit of a rise. So I'm going to make this top one the front leg. So let's go ahead and mark it as such. So it's a front leg, cut 2. There we go. And then this other one is the back leg. And we need 2 of that as well. All right, and now we're going to change this just a bit. So I need to find my eraser. There we go. So the front leg dipped a little. So I'm going to erase that line. And we're going to drop it just a bit. And the back leg came up just a little. Right? And the difference in that was about 2 inches. It was actually probably closer to 1.5 inches. So the measurement then for the entirety of the back is going to be 40 plus 1.5 inches. So 41.5 inches. So let me put the text in for that. 41 and 1/2 inch total. For that one. And then for the front leg, it's going to be 40 inches minus 1.5 inches. So that's going to be 38 and 1/2 inches total on this front leg. Can I have the move icon? There we go. Perfect. And now I need that 4-point line again. And I'm gonna put that curve in. So matching up those 2. And this is just a nice sloping curve. And it flattens out on both sides to keep those 90-degree angles. Something like that. That's not the same curve. Interesting. I thought I could copy and flip it, but that's okay. So we'll do it again. This point to this point. And again, a nice sloping curve. And I'm telling you, if I can do this in paint, then you can absolutely do this on paper. The sloping curves you can do freehand or with a ruler that has a curve, and the rest of it you can do with a standard ruler and any straight edge. So there we have it. That gives us our back leg, our front leg, and then the pockets we measured to be the length of a phone that we have, plus a few inches, and then curves, right? So the phone was a rounded square with an edge on it, right? and I believe it was around 10 inches total. So something like this. And then it's going to extend out a bit on one side. So there. To about there. And then I need a curve for it. The opening on it needs to be big enough for your phone to fit in. Again, this is not to scale. We'll do a 2-point curve for it. That looks pretty good. Right? And then it needs a line. And so the total height on this is your phone plus about 3 to 4 inches. Right, so there's your height. And I know that's a little wishy-washy, but really it's going to depend on what your phone is. If you have, an older Apple phone, it's going to be a lot smaller than the Samsung S9 Plus or whatever that just came out, right? I don't know what phones are. I'd buy the cheapest thing that's out there, right? And then the difference then on the other side is going to be the opening. This has got to be the width of the phone or the width of your hand so it can fit in and rotate to go into the pocket. And the width again of the pocket should be the phone plus about an inch. So this entire opening, let's do the bottom. That's going to be your phone plus an inch, right? So that's this width. And then another 1.5 inches for this piece here. And that means that the total width of the top is your phone plus 2.5 inches. Right? Width, length. So keep those in mind. And this opening is the width of the phone or the width of your hand. Plus at least an inch. And you can draw that by hand. You can figure that out, right? Let me reduce the size on this one just a bit so we can fit that in there. That looks good. Okay, so there's our basic pattern. And then let me mark this. It's pocket. Oh, where did my words go? Pocket, cut 4, right? There we go. So So now we have the front leg, the back leg, and the pocket. And that's the entire pattern, right? That has everything that we need to make PJ pants. The only other thing that we're going to add in here is the elastic that goes along the waistband. Now, there's a couple of rules of thumb on the elastic. And generally speaking, what I tend to use is where I want it to sit minus 10%. So I want this to sit roughly at my waist. And so that's going to be my waistline, 32 inches, minus about 10%, somewhere between 10 and 20%. That means that my elastic, right, needs to be waist minus 10%, which is roughly somewhere between 28 and 30 inches. That way, when I'm actually wearing it, the elastic pulls in a bit, it hugs a bit. And so that's my goal for the elastic. Now remember that this 12 inches, after we take out seam allowances, it's going to bring it down to roughly 11, maybe a little bit less. This waist is going to be about 40 inches, so we're going to be reducing the waist by almost 10 inches, a little more than 10 inches. But it's going to slide up over our hips easily and then cinch in. So that's our goal. So this now is the entire pattern with all the pieces we need. 2 front legs, 2 back legs, 4 pockets, and the elastic for the waistband. And that's everything we need. If you wanted to add in other things like a drawstring or I don't know what else, if you want to bedazzle it, you could do that too. But I'm going to leave that for another time, and that's something that we can certainly discuss in the future. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my machine set up, and we will get to the sewing portion of this. So again, I will have a Discord set up very soon, which you'll see down below. And I'm going to have my YouTube channel linked down below once I have this edited so that you can see this entire process done in one nice, clean video up on YouTube. And we'll be good to go from there. So I'll see you in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Hello again. Alright, so that's going to take just a moment for everything to come into frame and focus, because this camera likes to focus on movement and doesn't so much like these patterns, I've noticed. I will have to work and play with that a different time. Okay, I just wanted to get my microphone moved a little bit. I'm gonna get some of this stuff out of the way. And if you haven't done so in a while, I highly recommend hydrating. Because I know I need to. And if I'm forgetting to hydrate, you might be too. So take a moment, get some water, get a drink, go on back. Okay, so we have all of the pieces essentially that we need now. I have the front leg. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the back leg. I made sure to mark my legs with chalk on the inside of it so that I would know which legs I was working with. Okay. So I have 2 back legs cut. I have 2 front legs cut. Right. I've marked with an F. I've got the pockets marked. And there's 2 of each. I made sure to cut it so that they were reversed, so that I had a left and a right. And then I have 4 pockets. And again, the pockets are cut so that 2 are one way and 2 are another way, reversed, so that when they go into the actual garment, this pattern is on the inside of the pocket, so that if they flip inside out, or you can see the edge of them, they match up nicely, right? That's kind of important. It's not that important, but it's little things that people tend to notice. So for sewing this, I don't know if my mic is going to pick up the serger, so I'm gonna be flipping the mic on and off, and I tend to forget that the mic gets turned on and off, so hopefully I won't make that mistake, but we'll see how it goes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach 1 pocket to each of the legs. And the reason I want to do that is so that when I come back and do the outseam, the pocket becomes part of the outseam, and it all becomes one piece. And that'll be easier later on. I'm also going to do that because I'm going to take a little break in part of this to go and iron. Ironing is one of the most important pieces in sewing garments. It helps to make things lay the direction they're supposed to lay. And so that's going to become integral to this sewing. Now for the sewing itself, I'm going to sew first the inseam to each other, right? So I'm going to sew a front leg to a back leg, a front leg to a back leg, and then I'm going to sew this seam, the crotch seam, the front and back seam, all the way as one seam from the front to the back or from the back to the front, however way you want to look at it. Then, after that, I'm going to go and iron. I'm going to iron the pocket out. I'm going to iron this seam down so that everything is nice and neat. And then I'm going to sew that outside edge. And then we're going to take the elastic and attach it. The elastic I'm going to do with a standard sewing machine, but the rest I'm going to do with a serger, just because it's easy. Right? Gotta have pockets on everything. Hey Gutsy, how are you? Yes, we definitely have to have pockets. So, for this actual sewing itself, if you have a serger, use it. It's your best friend. If you don't, this is a woven fabric, and so on your sewing machine, you could do a straight stitch and then a zigzag right at the edge, and that would prevent it from fraying. Or if you have pinking shears that have a zigzag in them, you could just cut along the edge. So those are the options for this to keep it from fraying in the future. A straight stitch and a zigzag, or a serger, or pinking shears. And pinking shears have like an alligator look to them. I'm really good, Gutsy. All right, so given all of that, let's go ahead and get to this. So I'm gonna open up each of these legs, I'm gonna attach pockets, and we'll go from there. So I just need one leg for now, and I'll pull the rest out and set them aside. And one pocket. Now, the pocket that we need matters, right? I want to match the right side of the fabric to the right side of the fabric. And so, when I look at this, this is the inside of the pant, where the inseam is. So the pocket's going to go over here. So then this is not the correct way to line up the pocket, because when this becomes the pocket and it goes to the inside, it's the white fabric. It's the wrong side of it. So I'm going to pick a pocket such that the right side of the printing of the pattern faces the right side of this fabric. Yeah, absolutely, Gutsy. And this is the same way that you would add pockets if you purchased something without pockets. You would just take out the seam on the outside of the pants pockets, or of the pants, down as far as you need to add pockets, and you would just sew them in, and then you would sew them back up. So I will go into that a little later. I have some skirts that need pockets, but that won't be today. So we will do that later. I cannot have a skirt that does not have pockets. It's just not allowed. And I'll also show you, if you have a skirt that doesn't have a side seam, how to turn it into a skirt with a side seam if it's just a little bit big, so that we can still add pockets, because that's super important, right? So now that I've chosen the correct side of the pocket, I'm going to line it up with my markings, right? So I marked on the back side of this where the pocket is going to go. And I'm just going to line that up with my pocket. So that's right there. So I know that's difficult to see on camera, but you can just barely make out that blue mark of the chalk. May or may not be able to see it there, but that's how I set that up. And so that tells me where the top and the bottom of the pocket go. And so now with the pocket there, I'm just very quickly going to pin. Now for a serger, it's super important that you pay attention to where your pins are, because a serger will absolutely destroy needles if you go through pins. And for this, just because I've been here before, I'm only going to use a pin at the very end. And this fabric has almost a bit of a sticky feel to it because it's a flannel. You know, flannel has that fuzzy kind of feeling to it, and it kind of sticks to itself. So if I move the top fabric, the bottom moves with it. I'm going to use that nature of the fabric to feed these two in at the same time. But one of the other things that I want to do is we saved some scrap fabric. That scrap fabric I'm going to use to test my seam first. And once I've got 2 layers of fabric going through the machine, making the seam I want, then I'll know that 2 layers of the fabric I do want to go through the machine make the best seam they can. So I'm going to grab 2 pieces of scrap real quick and test that out. You would do the same thing with a sewing machine as well. Okay, so I just did a real quick test. So this is the seam that I've done with it. And you can see that at the very end, I didn't get the greatest edge with it, but it looks pretty good overall. And if we open it up, you can't see too much of that color showing through, except where that mistake occurred. So I think I'm going to increase my tension just a little bit so that it doesn't show through, and try it again. Now, the tension increase is going to vary depending on your machine, but this specific thread on my machine is the furthest left thread that goes through the needle. And if I look at my machine itself, it looks like my thread is curled around the needle. So I'm going to need to make a quick change to that and rethread that needle, because having a thread that's kind of curled around a needle is not a good idea. So I'm going to rethread that real quickly. It'll take me just a moment. All right, so to answer your question, Gutsiella, yes, this is a serger stitch. And so essentially what that does is it puts 2 stitches straight down, and then it takes 2 more stitches and it loops them over. And what that does for me then is essentially the same thing as doing a straight stitch and a zigzag at the same time. So it's going to prevent this from fraying because it's wrapped the outside edge of this fabric. And you'll see this done with sports fabric. You'll see it done with the outside edge of jeans if you flip them over and look at them. And you'll also see this done on the inside of t-shirts. It prevents fraying, and it's a super easy stitch. It allows for things to stay stretchy. So I really love my serger. It's a great little machine, and I think it's one of those things that pays for itself over time. But I need to go ahead and rethread this particular needle one more time. And that'll take me just a moment. so we're rethreaded. I am going to adjust that tension where I think it should be, and we will try again. I want to make sure that my machine is set to all of the standard settings otherwise, because I'm not doing anything special with this. And I'm basically going to go right through the same stitch I did before. One of the other things that a serger does is that it cuts the fabric as it goes. So that's one of the other benefits to having a serger. So I'm just going to let it cut my fabric off on the old stitch and go right through it again. Okay, so taking a look at this stitch now, I've adjusted it so that the stitches are a little bit closer together. And now it is much, much tighter than it was before. So those stitches still show just a little bit, but I don't think that against this color, it'll be noticeable at all. So I think that we can go ahead and use that as is. And this is just scrap fabric, so I'm not afraid to toss it into a scrap pile. And the quilter in the family can use it, or it can be cut up and used in some plushies, or it can be used as a pillow filler, or a whole host of different uses. So don't ever throw your scraps away. Someone can always use them. Or you can use them to test out your sewing, right? All right, so setting up these pockets then, I'm gonna go ahead on mute, and I'm just gonna sew up the pockets, and I'll be back with you in just a moment. So just to mention, I'm turning off the cutting function on the pockets because I don't want to lose any of this particular fabric. I cut it to very specific measurements, and so I don't want to lose any of it, especially the fabric right at the edge here, because later we're going to sew through it again and go along the edges, and that's when I'll worry about cutting the fabric edges. I don't want to cut any of the fabric that's part of the pocket. That's an important fabric, so I'm going to hold on to it. Okay, so now just to make sure, we have the right side of a pocket to the right side of the fabric, with the pocket facing the right way down, right? Right side to right side, with the bottom of the pocket towards the bottom of the leg. Same here. Right side to right side, bottom of the pocket towards the bottom of the leg, and our last one. Same thing. Now, we're going to do the inseam. So I'm going to line up the bottom of where the crotch seams meet to the inseam, all the way to the bottom of the leg. We're going to do this long seam. So we're going to use that same idea. It's going to be right side to right side, and that's going to match up our legs. So now I need to check on the back where I wrote a B or an F in chalk to tell me that this is the back leg or the front of the leg. So this is a B for back. This is a B for back. So this will be an F and an F for front. So I can start with this one. So this is an F. I'll need a back to match it, and it'll basically be matching up a pocket and an inseam, right? That's going to be this piece, matching right sides to right sides. So this pocket matches to here, and the inseams should line up. So I'm going to pin for the inseam, and then all the way down the leg. And then we'll be ready to sew afterwards. Now this is where having that right angle at these corners really helps. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins. Again, I'm relying on the fact that felt kind of sticks to itself to help me out. So I'm going to pin at the bottom of the leg, and then just a couple of pins in the leg itself should be enough for it to stick pretty much the whole rest of the way. And I like to do all of my pinning at once and then all of my sewing at once, so I'm going to pin the other leg as well, so that I can do all of the sewing as a single step, all of the pinning as a single step, so that I'm doing all the same steps together, and it feels kind of like assembly line without being an assembly line. It makes me feel a little more efficient. So here's this curve. And this curve, we're matching a front leg to a back leg, so it's not going to be the exact same curve, because we have just a little bit of a difference in the curve lengths from the front of the leg to the back of the leg, because we made a little more room for the butt. So I'm just giving this a little bit of a push in the right direction so that everything kind of lines up. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be close. So that looks pretty good. Everything's lined up there. This needs to be lined up a bit, so I'm just going to slide that fabric a bit. You can give it a gentle tug if you need to. There we go. And that should all line up now. Nice clean seam. It'll be done in one shot. Must be perfect, right? You know, I tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist in the rest of my life when it comes to my job and the way things work there. But it turns out in sewing that the human body is 3D and we sew in 2D. And it turns out that when you take this and you put it on yourself, there will be ways that you can modify it to quote unquote perfect it then. This is getting everything shaped right, and this is a very loose fitting garment, and so it doesn't need to be perfect because I want it to be loose fitting. I don't want it to be perfect. I don't want it to be form fitting. If it needed to be form fitting, I would take the time to really perfect this and make sure that everything was down to the millimeter. But that's not what this is about. This is about being comfy and being able to just lounge about. So no perfection is needed here. And that's why I think that this is such a great first sewing project, because you don't need the perfection. It's going to be a loose fit. And if it's not perfect the first time, you know, it's a great jumping off point to kind of learn, well, how do I modify it? How do I fit it? How do I make things work? So there's our first seam. I'm just going to set this off to the side for a moment, and we'll do our second one. Again, I'm going to lay out so that I've got a right side facing up. I've got the inseam right here, and then I'll lay my other piece on top with the right side facing down. I'll get the pockets kind of lined up, and then we'll start pinning that inseam. So this corner at the inseam is the most important corner, and that's why I spend the most time on it, making sure that these right angles line up. And then I'm going to pin it, and we'll go from there. And when I pin, I always pin so that the needle point is towards the inside, because when I sew this, I'm going to be pulling from this edge. The sewing machine is going to go through this way, and I pull the needles out with my right hand because I'm right-handed. So I insert the needles so that I can pull them out without sticking my finger into the pin. That's important to some people. It's certainly important to me. So I always put the needle head the direction I'm going to pull out. And we'll line up the bottom of the leg and place a pin there. And then we're just going to set everything else up so that it fits nice and neat in between those two sets of pins. So this curve again is not exactly the same on front and back, so we're just trying to get it close. So right about there looks good. And then I'll move down to my next leg. Because this curve continues for a little bit. That looks pretty good to me. And then this is where the leg kind of straightens out. Make sure that those edges are lined up nicely. And throw one more pin. That's pretty good. Take one final look just to make sure. Yeah, that's pretty solid. So now I'm going to go ahead and do this seam. I'm again going to go on mute so that the machine doesn't drown everything out. And this one I'm going to do the bottom of the leg up because of the direction that I pin things, but you could always reverse the pins if you wanted to go the other way. It doesn't really matter all that much, but I'm just going to go and follow this line. Now, remember that we've got a 5/8 inch seam allowance in here, and my serger is going to cut the fabric. So I have a little mark on my serger where 5/8 inch is that keeps me, right in line with where I should be. Yeah, feel free, Gutsy. Go grab dinner. And so I'm going to let the machine handle my seam allowance here and cut for me. On your sewing machine, you'll also have a 5/8 inch mark. Keep track of where that is, because that's going to be important later. Especially if you need to let out for any reason. That will allow you to get a little extra room. But we're going to go ahead and go with this. And I'll see you on the other side. So one thing that I can feel is that my edges here, just by fingertip, are not quite lined up. And if I flip this over, you can probably see that here. This edge is not quite lined up. So I'm just going to reach under and line that up. And I'm going to hold this with my fingertips just along here so that I don't lose it. So I'm not going to put a pin in it because it's in between two pins, and this fleecy, flannelly kind of fabric should hold it there. But just to make sure, one of the things I am doing is I'm running a fingertip along these edges as I go to make sure that they stay lined up. I either want to be able to just barely see the edge of some of the fabric, or I want to be able to feel it underneath and make sure that the overlap is right where it should be. Okay, so now I've done the inseam of both of these. I'm just gonna turn it inside out, or right side out, to take a look at those seams now. And that looks pretty good to me. Just a quick glance to make sure that we're still on the right track. Yeah, pretty good. Now, with this pattern, I didn't try to line anything up. You know, this pattern isn't really conducive to lining up the lines along the way, so I didn't worry about that. But one of the things that we did talk about was that seam allowance. So the serger does a certain amount of sewing here, right? Where this seam, there's about a 1/4 inch. Hello, Trinity, how are you? There's about a 1/4 inch of this that, you know, kind of gets folded in. It's not really usable. And the serger also cuts off about a 1/2 inch from where I'm at. So that's where that 5/8 inch goes, right? So that's accounted for in this. So now we've done the inseam for a front and back together, and a front and back together. And now I'm gonna go iron. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Enjoy the music, and I'm gonna iron. Yeah, we're almost done. We've got 3 major seams to go. And then the elastic and the hem. So I'd say we're a third done with the sewing, right? So for ironing is super important. It's one of the most important parts of your sewing. And I'm gonna keep saying this over and over because it is absolutely true. So, what do you iron? How do you iron? Well, with the pockets, I want this pocket that's here, right? I want it to turn inside out, and I want the outside of it to show, right? I don't want the inside of the pocket to show. So when I iron this, I'm going to iron it so that the inside of the pocket doesn't show. And I'm going to create a crease there. And that crease is going to help guide my next sewn line. So that I'm going to go ahead and iron. That'll take me a few minutes. And then I'm also going to iron this stitch that we've just done on the inseam. And it doesn't matter which way I iron it, as long as I iron all of it in one direction. And the reason that we do that all in one direction is so that it lies nice and flat later. And that's going to matter when we do the next set of seams. When we do the hem at the bottom, and when we do the elastic or this seam across the top, the direction that it lies, nice and flat, will matter for that next seam because we want it to lay nice and flat within the next seam that we're going to make. So I'm going to iron that, and that's going to give us a more finished look in our end product. So I'm going to take 5, I'm going to go iron these out, and I will be back. So we've got pockets and an inseam to iron. Then we're going to seam the front and back leg to the front and back leg. And then we're going to do the outseams. And the outseams will include adding these pockets in. And then we're almost done. And I'll switch from the serger to the sewing machine, and we'll go from there. All right? So I'll see you in just a few minutes. Enjoy the music and hang on. Go grab some water, do some stretches. I'll see you soon. Okay, I'm back. So, Pretzel Rocks is the music that I'm using on stream, and I wish that it would not give me music that had words in it. I've asked it not to. But in order to use it, I have to let it spam the stream with the name of the song that I'm using. And it's supposed to give a link to the song if you wanted to download and listen to it yourself. And this is how it stays royalty free. So the service I was using before went down, and this is the only one I found so far that allows me to keep playing chill beats and working with that. So unfortunately, that's all I really have to work with right now. And I'll figure out something better later, but for now, that's our music player of choice. It's a sad, sad day, but it is what it is. Okay, so getting back to what we've got. I've gone ahead and ironed everything. So this seam lies nice and flat now. The pockets, you can see, are holding a nice crisp edge now. So even if I let that fall, you can see that it keeps that nice crisp edge. And that's going to help me when I actually sew these up. It's going to keep that edge, hopefully forever. And that's going to, well, not hopefully forever, but, washing it and stuff is going to affect that. But by doing that, it's going to ensure that when I do these seams together, it holds at least part of it forever. And that will prevent the inside of the pocket from coming outside the pocket to an extent. And the other thing that we did is we went ahead and made a pattern. So this pattern will be available at a later date. And you can watch the beginning of the VOD to see how we did this. So for people that don't have their own PJs to copy from, we went ahead and labeled out the entire process of building this pattern from scratch if you don't have your own PJs to build off of, using your own measurements. So you could use a pair of pants that are comfortable for you or a pair of shorts and build off of that and make your own from scratch. So that'll be in the VOD later. And once I've got the Discord and the YouTube channel set up that are going to go with all of this, these will be available for download for you so that you can take and adapt them and build off of them so that you can make your own following all of this stuff here. All right, so getting back then into the actual sewing itself, we started with 8 pieces, right? 4 pockets, a front and a back leg of each. And now, again, we're going to take right sides facing, and we're going to do the inseam of the butt and the front. And we're going to put those together. So I really need to pay attention now to my chalk markings. I marked in chalk, and I know you can't see this because of how light it is, but I have an F on this side, and I have a B on this side. And again here, I have an F on this side and a B on this side. So I want to make sure that the F sides go together, and I want to make sure that the B sides go together because the front seams are going to touch. So I'm going to match front seams to front seams, right side to right side, and then I'm going to match back seams to back seams, right? So this is not the easiest setup for lining things up, but this is the front side, right sides facing. Here's my inside seam. So I'm going to match those up. Inside seam, inside seam. And then this is the back side, checking for that B. And this is the back side. Again, checking for the B. So I'm going to put a couple of pins in, just like we did before. And you can kind of flatten out these pieces a bit. They've got curves in them now, so they're not going to go completely flat anymore. But we can kind of help them a bit and work from there. So I'm going to put pins in the major areas first. So the major areas are going to be where the front sides meet, right? And so again, I'm putting my pins in the direction I'm going to sew and pull them out from. So I'm going to feed it in this way, so the pin is going to go in such that when I pull the pin out, the pin head is where I'm pulling out, so that I'm not stabbing myself with the needle end of the pin. So I'm going to line this up a little bit, stick that pin in, and then I'm going to go to the next major point. The next major point along this is that inseam. The inseams I ironed so that they face the same direction. You could iron them so they face different directions, but because this fabric is so thin, it doesn't matter as much. If you face them different directions, then you wouldn't have this overlap of a little bit of fabric in the serger or in your sewing machine. But it's not going to matter for our purposes. And again, I'm keeping track of where I'm going to sew from, so that when I put that pin in, it's the same direction, so that I pull it out. And I'm going to place the pin in to the seam. So I'm going to put the pin in so that it holds all of the fabric down, right? So that pin now has gone through the seam, and now it's holding all of this fabric down. And now I'm going to go to the back side, following that seam, and I'm going to place a pin at the very end. And now, at any point along this curve, this is a felt fabric, so it kind of sticks to itself, but at any point along this curve, where you feel like you need a pin, go ahead and place one. The more unsure of this fabric you are, the more pins you can place. So if you used a very silky fabric, you might need more pins. I think just 2 there is going to work for me. And then 2 more on the other side. So kind of following this curve, I want to get kind of the midpoint of this curve here. And then right where that curve kind of ends. And then the felt kind of stickiness of this fabric, where it kind of holds to itself, is going to help with making sure it all holds together. So there's the pinning for that. Now, the next seams that we're going to do is also going to be the outseam. Now, I could pin the outseam at the same time and then do this seam and both outseams, but I don't want to accidentally stick myself as I'm pinning here and slide along and stick myself with these pins. So I'm going to do this seam first, and then I'm going to pin both of the outseams and do those. So let's go ahead and sew this real quick, and then we'll pin so that we can get the pockets and the outseam in one single seam. So let's take care of that. Okay, so that's our inner seam. So this is the front to the back. Right? And now we're going to take care of the outseams. So again, just pinning along the length, and there's a couple of key points, right? So if we take a look at this, let's take a look at the letters. This is the front. So here is the front, and this side is also the front. There's my F. So if these are both the front, then this side is the back. So don't be confused and just start pinning and go. Make sure that the front is facing the back. Because if you just went from the last seam that we did, you would end up sewing the front to the front and the back to the back, and you wouldn't be able to wear these, right? So let's take a look now at what we end up with. We end up with this center piece, which is where the crotch lines up, right? Nice cross. And now the legs are going to get sewn together on up. The pockets will get sewn together to create one single pocket. And then the top will get sewn, right? And this is all right sides to right sides. So we're going to go ahead and pin that. We'll pin one side, then the other side, and we'll sew them on up. And again, I'm going to pin the key points first, and then we'll work our way from there. So I'm going to pin the very top. Making sure that those 90-degree corners match with each other. And we'll go from there. Now I need to decide right off the bat which direction I'm going to sew from, because that's going to determine what directions I put my pins in. So I'm going to sew from this direction, this way, pulling the pins out this way, right? Instead of sewing from the bottom of the leg up, I'm going to go from the top of the leg down. It doesn't really matter, you just want to determine that ahead of time. So there's the top of the leg. The next key point is going to be where the pockets match up, right? We want to make sure that these pockets are aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and line them up. And we cut them all from the same pattern, so they should match exactly. So I'm going to put a couple of key pins through them, namely the corners. Now remember, as I go around here, I'm coming from the top down. I'm going to end up going almost in a circle on this. So I still want to make sure that I'm pinning in the direction I'm going to be sewing at that time. And if you were doing this on a standard sewing machine, again, like we talked about earlier, you'd be using a straight stitch here and then a zigzag right along the very edge. Or you could just use a zigzag stitch. Or you could use a straight stitch and pinking shears. Whatever you're most comfortable with. Those are all valid options. Now I want to line up the corner of the pocket here. Right about there. And again, does not have to be perfect. So what I'm doing now is I'm folding this seam back on itself, because having this seam folded back on itself is what's going to cause that pocket to be folded towards the inside instead of kind of gapping outwards and showing us any of that inner pocket when it's turned inside out. And this is why we ironed it the way that we ironed it. So you can kind of see how we've got it laying so that it does that. Actually, I've got it ironed in the opposite direction. So follow your iron. You can see it's leaning in the direction it wants to be. So follow that. You ironed it in the way it should be for a reason. Don't go against that. And don't be afraid to use too many pins. You can't use too many pins. You might lose them, and that would be bad. But if you use bright pins that you can keep track of, you should be okay. There we go. And then the rest of the leg is pretty much a straight line. So the only other key point in this leg is the very bottom edge of it. So I'm going to line that up. There we go. And pin that. And then I'm just going to put a couple more pins along the length of the leg. And again, using the nature of the fabric to kind of help us out. That kind of felty stickiness. Right about there. Now, if one leg happens to be a little bit longer than the other, that's okay. Just pin it so that they line up in the end. So you can see that I ended up with one leg just a little bit longer than the other. It's longer by about 5/8 of an inch. And that's probably because of that curve at the top. And that's okay. We will fix this in the hemline as long as the rest of it lies neatly. And you can see I'm not giving this tension. I'm just letting it lie nice and neat. And when I do so, it looks pretty good. There's not too much extra in either direction. I'm pretty happy with that. So let's pin the other side, and then we'll get to sewing. Sorry, I just bashed the mic. It was in the way. Needed to be taught a lesson. So again, matching the top first. And then key points along the way, like the edges of pockets. And again, if it doesn't match up here, if it's off by a little bit because of that curve on your pattern, that's okay. The nice thing is, if it's wrong on one side, or off on one side, it's probably going to be off on the other side by the exact same amount, and that's okay. We will fix it later when we hem these. So we're ready to sew now. Again, I don't want to blast you with the noise of the sewing machine, so I'm going to throw this on mute for a moment. We can chill with this music, and I'm going to bust through these seams real quick. As I blast the mic by slamming fabric into it. Always fun, right? All right, I'll see you in just a moment. So one of the key differences between a sewing machine and a serger, and one of the things I don't hear people talk about a whole lot, is the way that curves are done. So I'm at the pocket right here, and the pocket comes off at a 90-degree angle. You can see that same thing here, right? So I've got a 90-degree angle between these two. So as I come through the serger, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch my fabric to turn the 90-degree angle into 180 degrees just at this corner where the pin is at. And then as soon as I'm through there, I'm going to release this edge so it can sneak back into a 90 degrees to come through on this corner. And then on this edge, as I come through, this one is just going to walk it through at a corner. So you'll see that motion of me holding it and just letting it pivot. Whereas with a sewing machine, you would go in a straight line here, you'd stop, and you would raise the foot but leave the needle in it, and you'd pivot it, and then run it straight down this length. And you could walk it along, again, pivoting with your hand. So just something worth keeping in mind, that 90-degree angles are hard on a sewing machine. They're hard on a serger, and there's something that is worth practicing. And if you're not comfortable or confident doing 90-degree angles, this is a good time to take out that scrap fabric and start practicing. Okay, so that is both of the outseams and our pockets. So you can see now that the seam where the pocket was done has now been kind of encased in that seam around the outseam. And this is now a good time to check by flipping it inside out to make sure that these in fact look like pants. Because they're essentially done. The only thing that's left is the elastics and the hemline. So let's flip them out and see what we've got. So essentially, the only difference now between the front and the back is a little bit of a curve. And you'll notice this immediately when you try them on. The backside's going to have just a little bit more room, but you won't notice this immediately just from looking at them. Right? So if I lay it like this, you can immediately see the back has a little more room. This little bit of extra room here is going to give a little extra room for your backside, right? And then as we go down, you can see the nice seams that we've got for the legs. And the most important part that we have to make sure works is to grab that phone and toss it in the pocket, right? Gotta make sure it fits. Because if it doesn't fit, what was really the point, right? There we go. So that fits into the pocket with no issue. And you can see there, it is fully in the pocket. It's not going to slide out or fall out. And we can check that on the inside too. So here's the bottom of the pocket. It didn't actually even get into the pocket. So let's put it all the way into the bottom of the pocket now, and you can see the shape of the phone there. And there's a little extra room at the top, and we've got a little extra room at the sides too. So if you wanted to fit a marker in there, or your earbuds, or some other stuff in the side of the pocket, there's room for that too. So plentiful, bountiful pockets that are not going to get in the way. Plenty of room in these for you to put in whatever you need. And now the only thing we've got to worry about is the hemline and the elastic. I don't have too terribly long before I go to dinner, and I need to switch out the sewing machine because I'm not going to do elastic with the serger. Yeah, I gotta love the pockets, right, Trinity? What's the point if there's no pockets? So one of the other things to point out, I haven't ironed these again, but you can see with them lying flat that the inside of the pocket does not show at all. And that's one of the reasons that we ironed it the way that we did. So in order to get the inside of the pocket to show, we have to have part of the pocket actually turned out. So otherwise, it just doesn't show. It's just a seam otherwise. And we can actually flatten out that seam quite a bit, and we just barely start to see that pocket show. So even if these PJs are relatively form-fitted to you, the pocket's not going to show. That's kind of nice. So the last thing I'm going to do with this then, before I take a break for dinner, and then come back to finish these off with an elastic and the hemlines, is I'm going to serge off this top edge. And I'm just going to serge it off so that it doesn't fray later. It also is going to add just a bit of stability. You could do the same thing, again, using a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch along the edge to prevent fraying, or if you have pinking shears, you could go right along the edge and do a pinking shear on this to keep it from fraying. And you can kind of see that this edge cut a little raw, you can just see the edges where it's starting to fray a little bit already, because this is a woven fabric. So those edges will start to come undone over time if you pick at them. So I'm going to very quickly hit those edges with my serger to lock those seams in. You can do that with a zigzag stitch. I'll show you how later on the hems, and then we'll finish these off. So after dinner, it's going to take us less than an hour to finish these off, and we'll be done. So all in total, it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to make the pattern. It takes about an hour to an hour and a half to cut everything. And if you're really good at sewing, it takes an hour and a half to sew them. So less than 5 hours to make a full pair of pants from nothing, right? And I know that seems like a lot of time, but if you're working with someone else, or you're going to use this pattern over and over again, then the pattern making portion is negligible, because you're going to use this same pattern over and over again. And if you consider then that the rest of that time, the cutting and sewing, is only about 3 to 4 hours, that time, while it might be spent doing other things, is also not going to be spent earning money to buy yourself a pair of PJs. You're going to save that money, right? So I love that idea. I love the idea of saving money so that I'm not buying my stuff when I don't have to. So I'm going to serge this real quick, and then we'll do a quick little outro, and I'm going to head to dinner, and then we'll be back after that. Okay, so now we've completely serged along this top edge. That's going to prevent any fraying in the future. And when we get back, I will show you how to do that same thing along the hemline so that there won't be any fraying there either. And we'll do that with a zigzag stitch, and then we'll do the hemline, and we will also add the elastic that I've cut in advance based on our pattern, and we'll put that into the waistline on these. And that'll take this waistline from about 40 inches down to my natural waistline size, which is about 32 or 30 with this waistband. So I'm gonna go to dinner and probably take the dog for a walk, because the dog has to be taken care of. And then I'll very quickly take care of all of that. I'm also going to go ahead and flip these inside out again and re-iron all of these seams in the direction that I've sewn them, so you can see that the way that I've sewn this has this seam falling to the left on the camera for you. And so I'm going to iron it along that same direction. That way, when this gets folded over for the elastic twice, everything folds nicely and it keeps it nice and flat. So it's super important that you iron your clothing in between seams. So I'm going to do that while I'm gone as well. I'm going to iron these and take care of that. So I will see you all soon. I'm going to get dinner. Trinity, take care of yourself. Gutsiella, thank you for hanging out with me. And a huge thank you to my new follower, Kestra Bestra. And I want to give another thank you again. Last night, Bunny Mercenary cheered 10 bits and wished me a happy Pride. And I want to wish the same to all of you. I hope that you are having a great Pride Month. And if you have the chance to protest or fight for your rights in some way for Pride, I hope that you're taking advantage of it. People before us fought for our rights in Pride, and I hope that we're continuing that fight. It's important, and I think we need to continue that. So, I'm going to take care of that stuff. I will see you all again soon. I hope... Let me bring this up. All right. I hope that you are all staying happy and healthy, that you are staying hydrated, and that you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Whatever it happens to be, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you again very, very soon. And once all of this series is done, I'll set this up on a YouTube channel and a Discord where you can download everything, including the pattern, and you'll have a nice edited version that's easy to follow and easy as a walkthrough. So I hope you'll join me. Thank you again. Bye.